Whenever I talk to people like Professor Mearsheimer, he always makes the point that while the US and Israel is, well, joint at the hip, if the key strategic interest of the United States is threatened, that this could be kind of the moment where the US will essentially elevates US interest above Israeli. That is, if it's peripheral interest, it will put Israel first. But if it's a core interest of the United States, then reality will have to be respected. Again, speculations or a thesis at least. But it is interesting that it's not just the core interest of the U.S., but also part of the Israeli, because again, from the Israelis' point of view, they often, I think, seek a more strategic depth in to enhance their security. So essentially seizing territories and sowing some chaos in its neighboring countries. Along the lines of Syria. I assume that's what they're going for in Lebanon as well. But what you're talking about, though, if Trump is trying to rein in the Israelis, aren't we talking about essentially ending the greater Israel project here?
Well, I'm not sure if it's so much Trump rather than forces more important than Trump. And those who I'm not quite sure Trump himself said put this into Axios, or people around Trump said maybe it's time to put this such a quotation or quote in Axios. Whether it's accurate or semi-accurate, it doesn't matter. What the public has been fed, and the widespread impact of this quote from Trump has had a huge impact. Um, I think that the Greater Israel Project is going to bring about the destruction of Israel. And I think that this whole 2.5 to 3 years of genocide that we've seen has pushed the Israeli regime towards its ultimate destruction. Because the greatest threat to the Israeli regime is not uh, the armies uh, of, uh, of neighboring countries. It is the delegitimization of the regime in the eyes of the world. So 2.5 to 3 years of genocide, which is ongoing. And then in addition to that, the global economic hardship that the regime is imposing. Because across the world, people are saying, I mean, for example, let's look at India. The Indian government has shown, unfortunately, a lot of support for the Israeli regime for the last couple of years, since the genocide. This particular administration, Prime Minister Modi's government. Yet the Israeli regime has shown complete disregard for the interests of the people in the war against Iran and what's happened to the Strait of Hormuz. So the hardship in India or in Uganda or in Argentina or wherever is going to be blamed on Trump and Netanyahu, and is being blamed on them. And according to colleagues in India, the mood in that country has become the majority are opposed to Trump. They dislike Trump now, and of course that the same is true with the Israeli regime. The mood has changed. So when a place like India has this shift, then you can imagine how it is elsewhere. I think this is the greatest defeat of all. Also, I think that right now, this is the Iranian strategy. I think that for weeks, this has been the Iranian strategy, that to increase the pain on the Americans until they reach an agreement, and continue down this road until the United States comes to the conclusion that they have to prioritize their own interests over the Israeli regime. So the siege which the Americans have imposed, which again is a double-edged sword, it's destroying, wrecking the global economy, and it's hurting Iranians, no doubt about that. The difficult economic difficulties in Iran are clear, but the Iranians will see this through. However, uh, however, whatever pain is inflicted on Iranians know that this is a fight for their survival. So what the Iranians are attempting to do is not to wreck the global economy. That's not an Iranian objective at all. Uh, but they want to continue down this course of action until the United States reaches a point that if we continue with this siege, And with this policy, it will wreck our economy. And so we have to make a decision that prioritizes the United States, the interests of the United States over that of the Israeli regime. This is, I think, similar to what Professor Mearsheimer was speaking of. And I believe personally, and I have not seen anyone else say this, so it may just be inaccurate speculation on my behalf. I believe that Axios report was not could be seen within this context, even though I believe that the Israeli firsters put that forward. In other words, even those who are Israeli firsters in the United States are gradually becoming fearful of what is happening to the United States because the way in which that will impact the mood towards the Israeli regime. And so I would imagine that quite a few Zionists and powerful people in the United States would be saying to themselves that, look, Netanyahu, Israel is becoming deeply unpopular in the United States. I think 60% now of Americans have they look negatively at the regime. And so if this continues, it becomes more entrenched and worse. And maybe if we remove Netanyahu and put someone else, some other genocidal monster in his place, we can say that the genocide and everything was Netanyahu and this is a new government and so on. Even though, according to polls and according to their own public statements by these opposition figures in Israel, they're just as genocidal. But in any case, this public relations they could have a public relations opportunity to try to change the mood in the United States. So I think that what Iran is doing is basically what Professor Mearsheimer was also talking about, to push the United States towards greater economic hardship to a point where the United States must conclude that we have to prioritize ourselves now rather than the Israeli regime.
But I think the United States is at least slowly coming to the conclusion that they can't win this war militarily. But I'm wondering to what extent the U.S. can accept the peace, though. I mean, if they can't do war, but they can't accept peace either. I say this because, well, if I was Iranian and holding on to the Strait of Hormuz, I would not just have a toll for rebuilding. I would use this instrumentally to enhance my security. That is, I would put a little bit higher toll on countries that sanctions Iran, because I would create economic incentives to remove these sanctions. I would put a bit higher tolls on countries that threaten Iran by hosting U.S. military bases. Again, putting some incentives to have them scaled down or removed altogether. And again, you can also put a higher toll on countries that sell their oil in U.S. dollars to essentially put an end to the petrodollar system that links the U.S. security interests so closely to the region. Again, not advocacy. I'm just, if I was Iranian, I'm assuming that it's not just for reparations and rebuilding. So I guess these thoughts have also occurred in Washington as well. So to what extent do you think Trump could, twofold question. Do you think Iran would use the Strait of Hormuz instrumentally like this to also enhance its economic and military security? And to what extent does it become possible for the U.S. to essentially accept peace under those conditions?
I'm sure the Iranians are thinking that. I mean, as we speak, they are taking peace, and they will continue to do so, and they will restrict certain ships from enemy countries or unfriendly countries from using the Persian Gulf, and they may indeed have a two-tier system, or they may have preferable raids for friends and not so preferable rates for unfriendly countries. That, I think, is something they would definitely be, they've already been talking about, I'm sure. I find it very difficult to believe that the United States can come to any peace agreement with Iran. This United States, this government, this state, this I stand. Even if there is a ceasefire agreement, even if there is an agreement for the signed between the two sides in the coming days, or I doubt it's days, but in the coming weeks, I find, because it will be in two stages, as we all know, the first stage will be ending the blockade, ending the genocidal attacks on Lebanon and retreating, and of course Gaza, and the return of Iranian stolen assets, and the waiving of sanctions for Iranian oil and energy exports for the duration of the agreement. But and in return, Iran will promise not to develop a nuclear weapon, which it has done hundreds of times. No big deal. And the shipyard of Hormuz will go back to normal, the number of ships that pass through. So, but that's the first stage. The second stage would be the removal of all sanctions on Iran. Many of them are in law. The Trump can't remove, and the House and the Senate, I find almost impossible to imagine them to do such a thing, to remove those sanctions. And then, of course, the Iranian nuclear program, which the Americans want Iran to put aside, and that's not going to happen either. So what sort of agreement would they be able to agree upon? All of that, these are big questions, and I find it almost impossible for Trump to be able to come to some sort of long-term agreement with Iran. So I'm not even sure if we're going to have, I'm really not sure. It's still, for me, 50-50, whether there will be an agreement. And if there is an agreement, I think it's highly unlikely the second phase of that agreement will ever reach the ultimate results that either side is seeking.
No, at this point, it seems, I guess, more probable that it will be a extended ceasefire under continuous negotiations of the terms. Again, it's hard to say, but again, this is not a stable situation, especially pointing to the global economy. I have read lately, though, a lot of speculations about Iran's nuclear weapons. I'm not going to say nuclear weapons program or that it has nuclear weapons, but the assumption has often been that Iran would position itself as a threshold state. That is, if, for example, Israel would strike Iran with nuclear weapons, the Iranians would be in a position to quickly cross that threshold, assemble something of some rudimentary nuclear weapons, and then retaliate. That this would essentially be its deterrent. That is, having a nuclear deterrent without becoming a nuclear power. Again, you can assume Japan, other countries would do something similar. But others have speculated that Iran might try to send a powerful message by having a nuclear test or something along these lines. I was wondering, how do you see this? Because on one hand, that would be a powerful deterrent. On the other hand, it would perhaps turn much of the world against the goodwill of Iran. So again, I'm not sure what to make of this. So I thought, who better to speak with than a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team.
I have great respect for Larry Johnson and Pepe Escobar. He too is a very good friend of mine, and I have great respect for him. I know both of them personally. We've been together, and their information, I listen to what they have to say on different issues because they have a lot to offer. In this case in particular, I don't have any information on this front, on this issue. Until now, the Iranian policy has not been to pursue nuclear weapons, and it's been stated in public. There's a fatwa, and that fatwas are very serious things in Shia Islam in particular. In Shia Islam, of course, the mujtahid, the highly qualified expert, the jurisprudent. For him, in Shia Islam, the gates to ijtihad or the gates to jurisprudence are open, unlike in Sunni Islam. So time and place have an impact on religious laws and regulations. The laws can change. Of course, the foundations of it's not relativism, but laws are also influenced and impacted by time and place. So, in Norway would maybe have there would be different laws in Shia Islam, in some respects than in Brazil or in Tehran or somewhere else, Iran. And the different eras are different. So the 21st century is different from the 20th century. So time and place is important. The context is important. Ayatollah Khamenei, his ruling, his fatwa was clear, and that there would be no nuclear weapon. But even at that time, we did have Dr. Larijani, who was martyred in this war, who was the chair of the Supreme National Security Council. He said this actually before he was the chair of the council, but he was an advisor to the leader, that if there was an existential threat to Iran's existence, Iran's nuclear posture would change. Dr. Harazi, who was the foreign minister for 8 years under Khatami's presidency, Mr. Khatami's presidency, and he too was an advisor to a leader, and both of these men were martyred in this war. Foreign policy people, Anyway, he too said that Iran could have made nuclear weapons years ago, but Iran chose not to do so. And I think he also said that if there's an existential, he may not, I don't remember, I'm not quite sure, but Dr. Larijani did say this. But Dr. Harazi said that Iran could have made nuclear weapons many years ago. So it has that capability. And it chose not to do so. And I think he said that if Iran's under existential threat, that its nuclear posture could change. So even under Ayatollah, the martyr Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran had that position. And the leader now, Ayatollah Seyed Khamenei, he would have to, the current fatwa stands, but if he were to make a different fatwa, he would be entitled to do so, because as I said, he's a different person, and he would have his own fatwa, and in Shia jurisprudence, time and place, the gated jurisprudence is open, so time and place matters. But I don't see any shift in the in public statements, in the mood, among senior figures in government and in the state. I don't see that shift. I don't see this sense that Iran is under existential threat, first and foremost, at the moment. So public opinion has changed, though. Before the 12-day war, a year ago, because the state was always saying, and the government and the senior figures were saying, we do not want nuclear weapons. They would always stress on the fatwa. Back then, the mood was almost 50-50 among ordinary Iranians. After the 12-day war, most Iranians wanted a nuclear weapon, according to polls. And I would imagine after this war, although it's still ongoing, probably the majority is even greater. And my anecdotal experiences on the streets of Tehran when people approach me are, why don't we have nuclear weapons? I mean, I think the majority, I would imagine that the strong majority now wants that. But I don't think the state at this moment wants that. I've listened to what Larry has said. I've listened to what Pepe have said too, and I can't. I'm not privy to that sort of information, and I'm absolutely certain that they are correctly reflecting what has been told to them by people who have good sources. But there are a couple of things I imagine would be unlikely. One is to test a nuclear weapon. I don't see why. Let's say if Iran were to, at some point in the future, under, let's say, existential, if we're approaching a sort of existential threat situation, why would Iran test a nuclear weapon? I don't see the necessity of doing so, especially nowadays with the technologies and AI simulations and so on. You don't really need, I don't think anyone needs to do so. Why would they waste a nuclear weapon, let's say? So I have no information. I cannot reject what they say. I don't see the logic of testing a nuclear weapon. But I don't see any sign or indication among Iranian officials that the country is moving in that direction. I don't feel that the country is currently under existential threat. I think that the defeat of the United States on the battlefield was decisive. Iran's upper hand during siege warfare is clear. And I think so far, at least, I may be wrong, but I think that the United States does not want to continue a war with Iran, and it is looking for a way out. And I also believe that probably many Zionists, for their own, still Israeli firsters, they think probably de-escalation is better for the Israeli regime now. In fact, I've said this on your show before. I think that the Zionist regime is the biggest loser in the last 2.5, 3 years. And this war has been a big loss to them too. They've delegitimized themselves in the eyes of the world. They've weakened their United States, which is the country they need the most. They've created dislike towards the regime in the United States. So I think that martyr Zionists, for the sake of the survival of the regime, they would probably want to see Netanyahu removed and the Israeli regime backing down on to allow the de-escalation to continue between the United States and Iran. And that would, of course, include Lebanon. Not that they are not genocidal. They're just as genocidal as others, but I would think that some of them are more pragmatic and they would see the dangers that are approaching. But I think that Iran has the upper hand. Iran has its peaceful nuclear program. Iran is technologically advanced. I think we saw that on the battlefield. I don't see any indication of what our two very good friends say, quoting, visible for me. It's not visible to me.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be my running assumption that the main reason for not acquiring nuclear weapons would be the predictable proliferation in the region. That is, the Saudis, others would then start to look towards it. The Turks, quite possibly. But this is why I feel the.
And by the way, Glenn, sorry for interrupting. This war by Trump, if anything, I mean, not only has it made Iran into a world power, effectively, through its control of the Strait of Hormuz, but it creates an incentive for many countries to start thinking about nuclear weapons. Because countries across the world will be saying, he could be next for whatever reason. So what Trump has done is that it has increased the possibility, not of Iran, but of many countries to say, well, maybe we should think about nuclear weapons.
Yeah, well, that's what I was getting to. The main reason to acquire one would be if you make a country fear for its existence, and not only going to war with Iran, but then putting peace conditions as Iran essentially giving up its conventional deterrence, that is, its ballistic missile program, its regional allies. If a country fears for its existence, have no conventional deterrent, I mean, this is the perfect recipe for nuclear proliferation. So I'm wondering if they thought, thoroughly through what they're actually demanding here. But no, it's it's very hard to make sense of this war, the decision that's been made. Just a very last quick question, though. In terms of the U.S. intentions and pursuing the war or seeking peace, how do you read the U.S. current force posture? Do you see them building up or drawing down or just maintaining? Because I'm not getting a lot of information on this topic.
Well, just to touch upon what you said last, when it comes to the Israeli regime, the U.S. policymakers and Western policymakers are very irrational. And so they do things that they've destroyed their image, they've destroyed their soft power, and they've destroyed their economic and military capabilities, all for this little colony. And they've made Iran and the axis of resistance popular across the world. After 47 years of demonization of Iran, Iran is hugely popular across the global majority and you may be, I mean, you may be surprised to know how many people are supporting Iran in the United States right now, online and young people and so on. I'm not saying a majority or anything, but clearly things have changed. And so 47 years of Western demonization of Iran has crumbled because of their uh, because when it comes to Israel, they're so irrational and unreasonable. So this policy uh, of this potential policy, or the idea that will now grow among policymakers across the world, that we have to have some sort of deterrence in future. This has been brought about due to Western policy, but it's not just this. I mean, the rise of BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the realignments, the growth of the notion of a multipolar world. All of this is due to Western policy and imperial policy. So it's both global, but in our region with the Israeli regime, they are particularly irrational. So they're when it comes to global issues, they're irrational and hegemonic, and they 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 overreach. But in our region, they are particularly irrational. And that's what leads to Western media turning a blind eye to genocide in Gaza and Lebanon. I mean, in Gaza, the Western media said, "Well, we don't have a presence." So while we were watching kids being flattened and torn to pieces every day, they would look away, saying, "Well, we don't have people there." In Lebanon, they have a full presence, a large presence. But they do the same. They look away. They try to justify what the Israeli regime does. They keep saying these are Hezbollah targets while we're watching footage of dead kids and families being massacred. So the West has undermined itself utterly, and so when it comes to Israel, there is no morality aside. Their reasoning and their logic is cast aside, and they're utterly illogical and unreasonable. So I don't think they cared enough about whether this would cause other countries to pursue uh, nuclear weapons or not. They said we have to do this for the Israeli regime. What was your question? I'm sorry, I got so
Or
distracted.
the U.S. force posture in the region. Do you see them building up, drawing down, or just preserving it as it is?
It's more or less the same. It's a very large presence. They have not removed their assets, but it's not. From my understanding, the morale of U.S. troops is not good. Um, the weather is very hot and humid now in the Persian Gulf region and in the Arabian Peninsula. U.S. sailors on ships are having a very tough time. U.S. forces on the Arabian Peninsula are having a very tough time because their bases have been destroyed. So, and they have lots of equipment there that is not well protected. And I don't mean well protected from potentially Iranian attacks only, but also from the hot weather and from the sand. So the damage that's being done to U.S. equipment and planes and is enormous because of the humidity, because of the sandstorms, because of the heat. And so the morale isn't high. The equipment is not in an ideal environment for protection, but they are still there, and they haven't moved. And they've brought in extra troops, ground troops, and the equipment to carry out ground assaults. They are based in the Emirates, in Qatar, in Bahrain and in Kuwait, more than Saudi Arabia and Qatar. In Saudi Arabia and Qatar, they do have assets, but in these three countries, they have large numbers of. They're more active against Iran as we speak in these three countries, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, and in the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are trying to sort of take a different uh, position, and they're beginning to behave more reasonably. But again, if there is war and their territory is used, the Iranians will retaliate. There's no doubt about that. But there, we do see movement in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar in their policy.
Interesting. Yeah. Just a quick side note on the the Western media, though. I think they trapped themselves a bit, because I noticed as well, and especially at the beginning of the war, even before, if one would challenge the motivation for going to the war or the likelihood of success, one could be argued that, well, that's a pro-Iranian argument. Yeah, so it's kind of dismissed. It's similar to the war against Russia. That is, if you make the point that, well, you want to criticize the motivations, that this is not simply about helping, it's a proxy war, and also, we can't win this, then it's, well, that's a pro-Russian argument, and it kind of disappears. So no journalist wants to essentially be seen as taking the side of Iran. The great irony, of course, is that's the source of all this self-harm. If they would have been honest about, that Iran, for example, sees this an existential threat, then it could have been very predictable that Iran would be willing to absorb a lot of pain if its existence is at stake. And also, if it had been honest about the fighting power of Iran, this would also have been quite important. But yeah, I think this is a self-harm of being trapped in these narratives. But anyways, any final thoughts?
Just one final point. Just one final point. Last night the British Channel 4 News is sometimes a bit different from other English media, and some journalists more so than others. The Jon Snow, who used to be their lead anchor, was really, I think, a very decent person and unique in British media on television. And they sent a team to Iran, and I was on their show last night for a few minutes. I went to the streets with them, and then in those 4 minutes, the host, who's I think one of the banner journalists, said, "Yes, but he said, but in Iran, I see people on the streets who are afraid to approach us because there are guards around and rebel." And I didn't say it so much. The connection apparently wasn't that good at that moment. But I was saying, come on. What I wanted to say is, come on. After 3.5 months of war, after all the Americans had done, and it's clear where the Iranian people stand. But you still want to say that this is a police state? You're first and foremost, the message that you want to send to the West is, and you see all these people on the streets. If people are cautious about you, it's not because they're afraid of guards. It's because, for the most part, people don't trust you, and they think that if they speak with you, that you will twist what they say, and you will use it against Iran because you're from the British media. But he said he says, I see people on the streets who are afraid to approach me. I say, how do you know they're afraid? What do you see in their eyes? What is visible in So the problem is that narrative is still there. Even when they come to Iran, instead of saying, well, the Iranian people, they were steadfast, they rallied around the flag, they resisted this onslaught, this unprecedented onslaught where the Americans put in all they had, and the Europeans, the Americans, maximum pressure, sanctions, and regional countries were standing, regimes were helping them directly or indirectly. Instead of saying, acknowledging that the Iranian people were opposed to this war, he tries to sort of put in this, this idea that people are afraid. These people under airstrikes weren't afraid of standing on the streets and protesting. When their protests were bombed, they weren't afraid and they wouldn't flee. When people were killed in front of them on the streets, they wouldn't flee. But still, Western media, I'm not saying that the reporter is a bad person. I would imagine that reporter, in order to remain relevant in the UK, would have to speak in this, to say this sort of thing, so that he would not be accused, as you were saying, of being pro-regime or pro-Iran or repeating Iranian regime talking points and that sort of.
Apologist, that's a popular one too. Anyways, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day.